Hi, I'm here with Leigh Drogen, founder of Estimize, and he is going to be speaking on a panel later today talking about Wall Street versus Silicon Valley. Thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell me, what are we going to be talking about today? What are the hot topics in the Wall Street versus Silicon Valley?
I think, looking at John Stein's company Betterment and how that's disrupting asset management and mutual fund industry, I think that's a really important part of it. And one of the big themes for me is that the financial industry as a whole is a very inefficient industry for a reason, right? Like finance is all about an intermediary sitting in between two parties and trying to take a fee. And for a long time, mutual funds have done this and haven't added a ton of value. And, John's company comes in here and sits there and says fees at basically nothing and will algorithmically do it all for you. And I think he's very much disrupting the way that asset management industry works for everybody but kind of the very active quant funds, discretionary funds, the whole mass affluent, industry. So that's a really important one for me. The other one is really more kind of near and dear to my heart, with Estimize, which is investment research. And so for a long time, the sell side has really been the purveyor of, investment research. They're the ones who've been heard. And largely that's because the dissemination mechanisms have only been, the technology behind that hasn't been great. And so I think Silicon Valley comes in and, through the web, we make everything much more distributed, much more crowdsourced. And that kind of disrupts the sell side model a little bit. You kind of take influence away from the sell side and put it onto who really deserves it, which is the most accurate, most representative people. So that's a big one for me. And then I think there's going to be a couple other, topics that people get into.
So talking about the dissemination and the technology with that, is that going around the asset managers and the big banks and putting it directly in the investor asset owners' hands, or is this kind of working with them?
I think it's working with them. So it's all about having the buy side communicate with each other. The way it used to work is you basically had the sell side and they were pushing out research to everybody. And the buy side behind the scenes had been kind of quietly talking to each other about it. But now what we're seeing is technology gives the ability for everybody to crowdsource this information, and not only the buy side, but the independents and the non-professionals and everybody able to kind of communicate with each other. And you're seeing this on a lot of different platforms, not just Estimize, where we collect structured, forward-looking earnings and revenue estimates, but you're seeing it on platforms like StockTwits, where people are talking to each other in unstructured ways. You're seeing it on platforms like Slingshot Insights, where people are collaborating and crowdsourcing the cost of primary research calls instead of going to Gerson Lehrman Group. You're seeing it on SumZero, where the buy side is communicating with each other to kind of produce their own research and then share it. So there are a lot of different ways that kind of, this more distributed, Silicon Valley type feel to how research is done is kind of disrupting that old model.
So is the proper way of looking at this Wall Street versus Silicon Valley, or is it really a competition?
I'm not sure it's Wall Street versus Silicon Valley. It is. In John's case, it is definitely Wall Street versus Silicon Valley. Wall Street is on one side. They're trying to keep fees high. They're trying to, obfuscate things from the individuals who, buy their services. In John's case, it's definitely Wall Street versus Silicon Valley. In our case, in the research case, I think it's Wall Street working with Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley changing and making more efficient the way things are done, but not necessarily destroying the business of Wall Street. In John's case, I think it definitely is. Betterment is doing that. I think Estimize is more taking a chunk out of the old financial data companies than it is the Wall Street companies themselves. We're making that industry more efficient. I think you look at Slingshot, making that industry more efficient. SumZero, Seeking Alpha, making that research industry more efficient. But they don't necessarily destroy the sell side. It's more like we collaborate with the sell side.
Is it hard for you to get the data that you're looking at, or if you're coming in as an outsider, is it difficult to navigate the field and get access to this data?
It's a double-edged sword. So on one hand, startups in finance are not trusted, and they shouldn't be trusted because we're dealing with money, we're dealing with very important information. So there's a very high hurdle for trust to be built, as it should be. After you develop that trust, I think financial people are relatively rational. And when you offer them a better solution to something, they will run with it eventually once it's trusted. And after that, these models are just so much more scalable, so much better for investors than the old models. And so I think we've seen the scaling up of a bunch of these different platforms: StockTwits, Estimize, Slingshot, SumZero. Like we've Seeking Alpha, and it goes very quickly once that trust gets built. And so getting the data from all of the different contributors ends up being relatively easy after you cross that threshold. But getting to that threshold is a very difficult process.